What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, and there are tons of different mistakes that you could be making no matter what tier of ELO you're at. But for those of you who are specifically in lower ELO, from Iron to Gold, we have tips and mistakes that will guaranteed help you climb. You want to climb, you want to improve, you want to rank up this season, then definitely watch the video to the end. Now before we get started, I got a special offer for you. If you want a free Tesla Model S, that's right, you heard me right, free Tesla Model S, all you have to do is smash that like and subscribe button, and I promise you that I will personally care package a Tesla right to your doorstep. So what are you waiting for? Smash the like and subscribe, but let's just jump right into it, shall we? So the first tip, and most likely the biggest mistake that happens, it can even happen at the higher ranks, honestly, and it's routing terribly on eco versus not eco compared to like an enemy. So this is what you need to stop doing. You need to stop routing short, tight corridors versus enemies that are on eco. Repeat after me. You will get shotgun. Yep, that's it. In fact, what you should be trying to do is try to take point control, avoiding any sus angles or corners, and check out immediate ones with utility. Let me give it an example that will better portray this. So let's say you're playing Haven on attack, right? Instead of going A short, you go A long, and you check the immediate right and left corner with utility, you get plant down, then you control long with longer range weapons, and you will never ever die to a shotgun. The enemies that have shorties will also cry, trying to retake the point that you planted with shorty. Now, you see what I'm saying here. Essentially, you understand what the eco for the enemy team means. You never subject yourself to these close angles. You take point control and plant, all while maintaining that effective range, and the few angles that you can't directly avoid with your routing, you flush out with utility. Pretty simple stuff, but if you follow this, you will almost never die to enemies rocking shorties again. Now moving on to the second big mistake that happens a lot and that you need to fix right away is giving away information unnecessarily. Even making something as small as a little step can inform your enemy about your general direction and have them already be pre-aiming ready for you to swing. You also need to stop reloading when it's not needed. We've covered this before, but if you have a reasonable amount of ammo, more often than not, if you don't have perfect information about the enemy or they don't have perfect information about you, save your reload. Don't do it because you're gonna give every single enemy in your area the information of exactly where you are. You see, in a game like Valorant, if people know where you are, you will die so easily, and you should really be thinking about that. Another big thing is if your teammate is like trying to walk somewhere and be sneaky, do not run up all on them being extremely loud, okay? It is really important that each and every one of you are at least trying to be on the same page. Now, notice the big circle on your mini-map when you walk. If you're trying to rotate somewhere quickly, let's say it was planted across the map, then you want to rotate fast, but when that circle starts to touch the power angles of where enemies could potentially be holding, like the long choke point, like Heaven or whatever, you need to start walking and isolate that information. Then the enemies that are holding these angles won't know where you're coming from, and you can use that element of surprise to your advantage, but you at least rotated there quick enough to where you have enough time to check the angles before the spike explodes. Now moving on to tip number 3, this is about swinging angles and pre-aiming angles. So a big misconception about Valorant, what people often do is they'll go into the training room or Kovacs and they will just practice flicking all day. Watch any pro match and tell me how many flicks actually happen. Aim in Valorant is not really flicking at all, and it's hardly even tracking. Most of the time, it is pre-aiming angles, counter-strafing, and controlling your spray. Once you develop more and more map knowledge, you need to start pre-aiming places where enemies are likely to be as you swing it. You can even adopt the angles that you're pre-aiming depending on information that you learned. Basically, let's say you heard something like an updraft, you could swing and pre-aim upper boxes where a jet's head would be if she was on top of the box. Now, the reason that you do this is that you're imagining where they could be in this scenario, and you're swinging as if they are there, but you're not taking an engagement with no one. But if they are there, you're already ready, you're already lined up, and it's an easy shot. Now you tell me, if you swung somewhere or you did the jiggle peek strat where you don't make any noise, you swung or peeked an angle aggressively, and no one was there, what did you lose? Not really that much. But if they are there, you already have an easy headshot lined up because you're combining your crosshair placement with your map knowledge to allow you to take favorable duels on the enemy and be ready for them automatically. Then we go to the next mistake that we gotta talk about for low elo. It's just only planting in one spot. Did you know that the entire square around the map is an area where you could plant? All joking aside, every plant spot understandably has its own strengths and weaknesses. Default referencing the default plant zone typically is the default plant zone because it is safe from enemies when you are planting. But you need to remember that if you plant in safety, the enemies inversely are going to be more safe when they are diffusing because it's all about lines of sight of different angles, and when you're safe, they will be as well. Also, just planting in default makes it a lot easier for pre-learned rollouts by enemies, which is important, especially when people are running around like planting Nanoswarm on default or whatever. Planting in traditional places have other disadvantages as well. Now keep in mind, the best plants will have the LOS in mind for where you will position or your teammates are going to position post-plant. Whether you want to go and control long or heaven or whatever, remember that having a position far enough away so that enemies can't clear you out, but also still in LOS of the spike, puts you at a fundamental advantage. They have to tap the spike and you get info about exactly where they are, and they may or may not know exactly where you are. You can even jiggle peek the spike in pre-fire, but the most important thing you need to understand is you get information about them, they don't have perfect information about you. So this is all things you need to consider when deciding where to plant your spike. Now moving on to tip number 5. This is a pretty obvious one, but I gotta explain a few things. This is baiting out substantial amount of utility. Stop rushing in general, pretty much, unless you're on pistol round or on an eco round. Rushing is really not that viable of a strat. You need to be using your time as a resource. You have a lot of time, use that time to bait out more abilities. Some abilities like slows and wall can be easily pressured out with fire and simply the threat of you pushing onto a point. You can also bait out substantial amounts of utility and slowly rotate off as you leave someone behind so that the enemy can't easily rotate off. This works even better versus something that blocks off information like a Sage Wall that blocks LOS. Let me give you this example. Let's say you're pushing A main on bind and the enemy Sage Wall's off your team. Well, instead of immediately breaking it, some members of your team start to rotate off, and by the time they're near default of hookah, you start firing and putting pressure on the wall as the person that was left behind. You put tons of pressure, enemies know that you're there, they realize the pressure, and then out of nowhere, you jump through the teleporter and y'all all rush hookah. You baited out utility for a fair amount of time, the enemy doesn't have slows, they didn't full rotate because you put pressure on them, and now you're all of a sudden on the other side of the point, really putting pressure there, and that is a way that you can really take like a 5v2 or a 5v3, crush the enemy, get plant down, and then it's basically a dub from there. Now moving on to the next mistake that we have to talk about. This is rotating too quickly. Many players rotate at the first type of ability use or even the first spotting of an enemy. It's important to understand the difference between default contact, which is the areas before they get onto point, and point contact, which is actually inside in the areas where they can plant. If you have a strong suspicion, however, that someone is rushing for whatever reason, you can leave a point where two of y'all are there, but make sure that you leave an anchor and you don't just leave the entire site because then you have no information. You gotta remember that players holding positions is not just for fighting enemies, but for information as well. Let me give you an example of what can happen if people just aren't playing the right place that they should be. Let's say that you're playing Haven and you have someone on C and someone on mid, but you got no one guarding garage. An enemy routes through garage, sneaks up through window, walks all the way to B and kills your Sage that is waiting on B to plant a wall. Now all of a sudden you have an enemy in B and you have no idea where the heck their teammates are. You have no idea how many players snuck through window. You have no idea about a number of things. So it's about information, and now you have to basically guess where enemies are from many different sides. And remember what we talked about before. A lot of the skill level in Valorant is pre-aiming angles, but it becomes exponentially harder for you to do so when enemies could be behind you, in your spawn, in your heaven, wherever. It becomes way harder, and you have to do it a lot more, which takes more time, it's less consistent, and it's gonna be a lot harder. Now moving on to tip number 7, you should be trying, especially on an aggressive dueler class, to find value on flanks, but make sure not to do it too much. Especially duelers, flanking is so powerful because it cuts off rotation and you can essentially get kills on an enemy without having a fair fight. I mean, nothing is better than just shooting them in the back without them being able to shoot back, right? Now, here are some rules for flanking. You can never, ever let the enemies know you're flanking. If you are flanking behind them, you do not have time to check every single corner ever. You can check the immediate ones, but if enemies know you are coming, it is so easy for them to lay a trap for you. So you can't make any noise and let enemies know you're coming until the moments before you're engaging. Now, another rule is don't do it too much. For the exact same reason as before, if you keep flanking and flanking and flanking, enemies will catch on, they'll set a trap for you, they'll be like, this guy always pushes out here, they'll kill you, they'll find a pick on you, and that'll be their go-ahead. The third rule for flanking is some flanks are simply pushing up and holding a rotation angle, and then pushing in when they make contact. So instead of just flanking and flanking and flanking and just trying to find an enemy, you push up and cut off a rotation angle, and you just wait there. And if enemies decide to rotate, you can catch them off guard just hiding in a corner that cuts off their rotation. But if they start to engage, like let's say the mid, for example, if you flanked out somewhere, you can then wrap around that exact moment, use the commotion to make a play on them. So it's really about cutting off information, and then also you gather more information with sound cues because you're pushed up to a closer angle. Now, the last rule for flanking is realize that some characters are better at flanking than others. Characters like Reyna, characters like Phoenix, these characters have natural tools that make them far better at flanking than a character like Viper or a character like Brimstone. Realize when your character thrives at a certain type of playstyle, and don't try to force another playstyle because you're only going to set yourself up for failure. Now, moving on to tip number 8, you need to stop force buying and realize how your purchases now will affect your economy later. You need to have the right gun for the right situation. Stop putting yourself in a permanent submachine gun versus AR/op scenario. You're never going to win that way if you keep putting yourself in a disadvantaged scenario, even if you are actually better than the enemy on paper. Put time and effort into practicing great bang for your buck weapons, like shorties, marshals, stingers. These weapons are going to be great because you can buy them when you have a little bit of extra money. They can carry some rounds that you have no business winning, but you got to put the practice into these weapons. Now, I know you're going to say that you've already heard tips about economy over and over again, but if you've ever had those ranked games where they just snowball from one pistol loss to like 5+ round losses, 90% of the time it is because of a lack of joint economy, or really valuing how bad it will be for you if you force buy now and lose only to go multiple rounds in a row without being able to buy good guns. And if you never wait, if you never pay off the instant decent gun for the later better gun, it will never work out for you in the end. Now, moving on to tip number 9, this is abuse your agent's abilities. You see, every agent has some degenerate ways to get value, and if enemies don't counter it or don't know how to play around it, you can farm them. Aggressive AWP peek dashing on Jet or Jet shotgun strats, pre-learned rollouts for Raised Grenade, planting Nano Swarm in default plant zones on Killjoy. Go for pretty simple and basic but powerful strategies that many enemies won't know to play around or won't expect. Basically, what I'm telling you to do is force an enemy to respect you as a character, not just a body with a gun. Really start to abuse your abilities here and really try to make them work for you. Now, the 10th and final tip, and this might be the most important tip, notice enemy ultimates pre-round. Notice it. Really, really notice it. This loses players so many games, and it even happens at the highest ranks when people don't remember. Let me give you this example. You get the point right, it's a 1v1 and the enemy has the spike planted. You check one corner, you check another corner, and you check another corner, trying to find the enemy as the spike beeps down. You don't know what to do, so you start defusing only to get orbital striked. Now, you barely make it out, but now there's no time to defuse because you stopped defusing earlier. If you would have paid attention to his ultimate economy and knew he had orbital strike, you could have instead of insta-baited at orbital strike, because there's a lot of factors like, because he has orbital strike, he's most likely playing far enough away. So if you just would have ran to point, stuck the spike, he would have instantly orbital strike. You could have got out and still had enough time to pressure defuse and potentially take the 1v1. This all changed depending on whether or not you knew he had ultimate or not. That one tiny bit of given information to you pre-round changed the entire outcome of this round, which, as far as economy is concerned, or even the outcome of the game, it could be dramatically drastically different. So don't let yourself slip on this. This is a really simple thing you need to do. All you have to do is pay attention a little bit and you will win more games because of just this tip. Anyways, I hope this guide has helped you, made you learn something about how to climb from the lower ELOs to the upper ELOs. And I hope you're enjoying your fat, plat, diamond, and immortal style emblems in your new Tesla Model S. So make sure you smash the like and subscribe button. But that's all we got for you today. Thanks for coming by. I'm Coach Mills. And of course, until next time, I'm not responsible for notices.